They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But when I threw that glass of Cabernet Sauvignon into Lavenia's face at the most important gala of the year, I can assure you, my blood was boiling hot. The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across 500 faces, all frozen in shock as red wine dripped from the vice president's perfectly contoured cheekbones onto her $1,000 dress. The orchestra had stopped mid-note. Conversations died. Even the servers stood paralyzed with their trays of champagne flutes hovering in mid-air. And there I was, Evelyn Reed, the quiet data analyst who had spent 15 years building a reputation for being reliable and professional, standing in the center of it all with an empty wine glass in my trembling hand and a smile that probably looked absolutely unhinged. Security was on me in seconds. 2 massive men in black suits grabbed my arms, but I didn't resist. I had already done what I came to do. As they dragged me toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of Cressa, Lavenia's daughter, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. That smug expression finally wiped clean from her face. I laughed. Actually laughed, because for the first time in 18 months, I felt like I could breathe. But let me back up. Let me tell you how a woman with a spotless record, 3 industry awards, and a corner office almost lost everything to a mother-daughter duo who thought they owned not just the company, but every person in it. My name is Evelyn Reed, and this is the story of how I went from being a doormat to being the woman who brought down an empire. I had been with Hartwell Financial for 15 years when Lavenia Cross joined as Vice President of Strategic Operations. She came with impressive credentials, an Ivy League pedigree, and connections that made our CEO, Robert Bennett, practically grovel at her feet. Within 6 months, she had restructured 3 departments, fired a dozen senior staff, and consolidated power in a way that made everyone nervous. But she was effective, or so it seemed. Profits were up, clients were happy, and if a few people had to be sacrificed along the way, well, that was just business. I first met her daughter Cressa about 2 years after Lavenia's arrival. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was reviewing quarterly projections when Bennett called me into his office. Lavenia was there, sitting in one of the leather chairs like she owned the place, which in many ways she did. Next to her sat a young woman, mid-20s, with the same sharp cheekbones and calculating eyes, but with an air of entitlement that made my skin crawl the moment she looked at me. Bennett cleared his throat. He always did that when he was about to ask for something he knew was unreasonable. Evelyn, I'd like you to meet Cressa Cross. She just graduated from Yale with a degree in business analytics, and we're thrilled to have her joining our team. I extended my hand. Cressa barely glanced at it before turning back to her phone. Nice to meet you, she mumbled, her thumbs flying across the screen. Lavenia smiled that razor-sharp smile of hers. Cressa will be working in your department, Evelyn. I thought it would be beneficial for her to learn from someone with your experience. You'll be mentoring her. It wasn't a request. It was an order. And the way she said, your experience, made it sound like a liability rather than an asset. Of course, I said. Because what else could I say? I'd be happy to help however I can. That was my first mistake. Agreeing without understanding what I was really signing up for. The mentoring arrangement started the following Monday. I had prepared a comprehensive training program, printed out documentation, organized files, and even created a custom tutorial for our proprietary analysis software. I arrived at 8 in the morning to find Cressa wandering in at 9:30 with a Starbucks cup in one hand and her phone in the other. Sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. Traffic was insane. I smiled. No problem, let's get started. I thought we could begin with an overview of our data systems and then move into some basic analysis techniques. Cressa flopped into the chair I had set up for her at my desk and immediately propped her feet up on my filing cabinet. Sounds boring, but okay. For the next 2 hours, I tried to engage her in the work. I really did. But Cressa spent most of the time scrolling through Instagram, texting, and occasionally painting her nails. Bright red. The smell of nail polish filled my office, making my eyes water. Are you listening? I finally asked after explaining the same concept 3 times. She looked up, irritation flashing across her face. Yeah, I'm listening. You just talk a lot, you know? Can't you just give me the bullet points? I took a deep breath. Patience, I told myself. She's young. She'll learn. But Cressa never learned. Because Cressa never had to learn. Over the following weeks, the pattern became clear. Cressa would show up late, ignore my instructions, spend hours on personal calls, and then complain to her mother that I wasn't teaching her anything useful. And Lavenia, instead of addressing her daughter's behavior, would call me into her office to criticize my mentoring skills. Evelyn, I'm concerned, Lavenia said during one of these meetings, her voice dripping with false concern. Cressa tells me you're not giving her real responsibilities, you're treating her like an intern. With all due respect, I said carefully. Cressa hasn't completed any of the basic training modules. I can't assign her complex projects until she understands the fundamentals. Lavenia's eyes went cold. Perhaps the problem isn't with Kresa's comprehension. Perhaps it's with your ability to communicate effectively. That was how it always went. Every legitimate concern I raised was turned back on me. Every failure on Kresa's part became my failure. And slowly, methodically, my reputation began to crumble. The real destruction started with the Anderson project. It was a massive data analysis contract with one of our biggest clients, worth over $3 million. I had been working on it for 6 months, building complex models, verifying every data point, creating projections that would guide their entire fiscal strategy. It was the kind of project that could make a career. 2 weeks before the final presentation, Lavinia decided that Kresa should contribute to the project. Against my better judgment, and only because I had no choice, I gave Kresa access to the working files with strict instructions not to make any changes without consulting me first. The night before the presentation, I did my final review. Everything looked perfect. The models were solid, the projections were conservative but promising, and the visualizations were clean and professional. I went home feeling confident, proud even. When I arrived at the office the next morning for the 9 a.m. presentation, I found Kresa already in the conference room, setting up the projector. "I got here early to make sure everything was ready," she said with a bright smile that should have been my warning. The client, Michael Anderson, and his team of executives arrived promptly. Bennett was there, along with Lavinia, looking impeccable in a navy suit. I began the presentation, clicking through the slides I knew by heart. And then I reached slide 15, and my blood turned to ice. The numbers were wrong, completely, catastrophically wrong. Revenue projections that should have shown a conservative 5% growth were showing 30%. Risk assessments had been altered. Critical data points had been removed. It was a disaster. I stopped mid-sentence. "I'm sorry, there seems to be an error in this slide. If you'll give me just a moment." But Michael Anderson was already frowning. "Those numbers don't match the raw data you sent us last week." "I can explain," I started, frantically trying to navigate back to the original file on my laptop, but when I opened it, I discovered that someone had overwritten it. All my backups, all my original analyses, replaced with this corrupted version. The meeting fell apart quickly after that. Anderson was furious, Bennett was humiliated, and I was left standing there trying to figure out what had happened while everyone filed out of the room in disgusted silence. Everyone except Lavinia and Kresa. "Evelyn," Lavinia said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "My office, now." In her office, with Kresa sitting demurely in the corner, looking like the picture of innocence, Lavinia tore into me. I was unprofessional. I was careless. I had embarrassed the company. How could I have made such fundamental errors? Did I even review my work? "I did review it," I protested. "Last night everything was correct. Someone changed the files." Lavinia raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting that someone deliberately sabotaged your work? That's quite an accusation, Evelyn. Do you have any proof?" I looked at Kresa. She was examining her nails, that same bright red, with a tiny smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "The files were altered after I left last night," I said. "I can check the digital timestamps." "Please do," Lavinia said coldly. "And when you find that you're mistaken, I expect an apology. Not just to me, but to Kresa, who has been working so hard despite your inadequate mentoring. This is your final warning, Evelyn. One more incident like this, and we'll have to reconsider your position here." I checked the timestamps. They had been scrubbed, professionally scrubbed. Someone with IT access had covered their tracks perfectly. When I brought this to IT, they claimed there was no evidence of any tampering. The head of IT, I later learned, reported directly to Lavinia. The Anderson contract was pulled. We lost the client. And I lost my standing in the company. Colleagues who had respected me for years suddenly treated me like I was incompetent. Invitations to meetings dried up. My opinions were no longer valued. And through it all, Kresa continued to work in my department, showing up late, doing nothing, and somehow getting credit for everything. After that, things got worse, much worse. Kresa began actively sabotaging other projects. She would volunteer to help, gain access to sensitive files, and then introduce errors that I would inevitably be blamed for. She would schedule meetings and not tell me, then report to her mother that I had missed them. She spread rumors about my personal life, my health, my competence, and Lavinia protected her every step of the way. I tried to fight back, of course. I documented everything. I sent emails to HR detailing Kresa's behavior. I requested to be relieved of my mentoring duties. But HR at Hartwell Financial was a joke. They took my complaints, filed them away, and nothing ever came of it. I later found out that the HR director was having an affair with one of Lavinia's friends. Everything was connected. Everything was corrupt. My colleagues began avoiding me. Not because they thought I was incompetent, but because they were afraid. Afraid of Lavinia. Afraid of what would happen if they were seen supporting me. I watched as people I had worked with for years crossed the street to avoid talking to me. Lunch invitations stopped. Emails went unanswered. I was being systematically isolated. There was one exception. Her name was Ella Martinez, a junior analyst who had been with the company for only 2 years. She was young, idealistic, and brave in a way that I had forgotten how to be. One afternoon, she knocked on my office door and slipped inside, closing it quietly behind her. "I know what they're doing to you," she whispered. "And I know it's not your fault." I looked up from my computer, exhausted. "Then you're the only one." "No," she said. "I'm not. There are others. We're just scared." "But Evelyn, you should know that Cresa bragged about changing those Anderson files." I heard her telling her friends about it at happy hour. She thought it was funny. Something broke inside me at that moment. Not broke in the sense of shattering, but broke like a dam giving way. All the anger, all the frustration, all the humiliation I had been swallowing for months came flooding out. "Did anyone else hear her?" I asked. "3 other people from our department. But they won't say anything. They're too scared of Lavenia." I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." After Ella left, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the city skyline through my window. I thought about my 15 years at this company. My awards. My accomplishments. Everything I had built. And I thought about how easily it had all been taken from me by a spoiled brat and her corrupt mother. That was when I stopped trying to play by the rules. Because the rules, I realized, were designed to protect people like Lavenia and Cresa. The rules were the problem. I started small. I began keeping a second phone, one that Hartwell didn't know about. I used it to photograph documents, record conversations, and gather evidence. I was careful, methodical, patient. I had learned from my mistakes. This time, I wouldn't accuse anyone without ironclad proof. I also began receiving anonymous emails. The first one arrived on a Friday afternoon, from an encrypted account. "You're not the first." It read, "Check the archives. Look for Marcus Thompson, 2019. Sarah Chen, 2021. David Okonkwo, 2023. They all had the same mentor." I stayed late that night and dug through the company archives. Marcus Thompson had been a senior analyst, beloved by his team, with a flawless record. He had been assigned to mentor Cresa during her internship before she was officially hired. 6 months later, he was fired for sexual harassment allegations that were later proven to be fabricated, but by then, his reputation was destroyed. Sarah Chen, a brilliant statistician, had trained Cresa in advanced modeling techniques. She was fired for supposedly leaking confidential information to a competitor. The evidence was circumstantial at best, but it was enough. David Okonkwo had lasted only 4 months as Cresa's supervisor before being forced out for performance issues that appeared out of nowhere. The pattern was clear. Lavenia used her daughter to destroy anyone who might pose a threat or who couldn't be controlled, and the company, with Bennett's complicit silence, let it happen. I needed allies, but I had to be careful. That's when I thought of Alex Kim. Alex had been our senior IT administrator until 2 years ago, when he was abruptly fired for policy violations that were never clearly explained. I had always suspected Lavenia was behind it. Alex had been asking too many questions about data security protocols around the time Lavenia was consolidating her power. I found Alex working at a small tech startup downtown. When I called him and explained what was happening, he was silent for a long moment. "I've been waiting for this call," he finally said. "When can we meet?" We met at a coffee shop in a neighborhood neither of us frequented. Alex looked older, more tired, but his eyes lit up with something fierce when I told him everything. "She destroyed my career," he said quietly. "I spent 12 years at that company. I had a mortgage, a family. And she had me fired because I wouldn't help her bury evidence of her manipulating the financial reports. I couldn't prove it then, but I kept copies of everything." "Everything?" I asked. He smiled grimly. "Everything. Server logs, deleted emails, document revision histories. It's all backed up on a secure drive that she doesn't know exists. I've been waiting for the right moment to use it. I think that moment is now." Over the next several weeks, Alex and I worked together to build our case. He helped me understand how Cresa had altered my files, how the timestamps had been scrubbed, and how Lavenia had used her access to cover her daughter's tracks. He also introduced me to others who had been burned by Lavenia's schemes. Marcus Thompson was working as a consultant in Boston, barely scraping by after his reputation was destroyed. Sarah Chen had moved back to Taiwan. David Okonkwo was driving for Uber while trying to rebuild his career. They were all angry, all hurt, and all willing to help if I could guarantee that this time, Lavenia wouldn't escape consequences. "She's untouchable," Marcus said bitterly during one of our video calls. "Bennett protects her because she makes him money. HR is in her pocket. Who's going to hold her accountable?" "I will," I said. And I meant it, but I needed more than just testimony and digital evidence. I needed to catch them in the act. So I went shopping for some very specific equipment. The recording devices I purchased were tiny, professional grade, and completely undetectable when properly placed. A pen that recorded audio and video. A necklace with a hidden camera. A bracelet that looked like ordinary jewelry but could capture conversations from 15 feet away. I felt like a spy, which would have been exciting under different circumstances. Instead, I just felt tired and angry. I wore those devices every day, and every day, Cresa and Lavania gave me more ammunition. God, she's so pathetic. I heard Cresa say one afternoon to one of her friends in the break room, not knowing my pen was recording from where I had left it on the counter. She actually thinks she can teach me anything. My mom's going to fire her soon anyway. We're just waiting for one more screw-up. Isn't that kind of harsh? Her friend asked. Cresa laughed. Please. She's been here forever and hasn't accomplished anything. We need to make room for people who actually matter. I collected dozens of these conversations. Cresa bragging about sabotaging my work. Lavania instructing her daughter on how to manufacture complaints. The two of them plotting which colleague to target next. It was all there. Time-stamped, documented, undeniable. But I needed something bigger. Something that would force Bennett and the board to act. And then I found it. While going through the files Alex had recovered, I discovered something disturbing. Lavinia and Cresa weren't just destroying individual careers, they were actively committing financial fraud. They had been manipulating data to inflate the value of potential acquisitions, skimming money from consulting fees, and misrepresenting our company's portfolio to investors. It was subtle, sophisticated, and if discovered, would result in criminal charges. The biggest fraud involved a company called Harrington Industries. Hartwell Financial was in the process of acquiring Harrington in a deal worth over $200 million. Lavania was leading the acquisition team, and according to the documents Alex recovered, she had been systematically falsifying the due diligence reports to make Harrington look more valuable than it actually was. She and Cresa had created shell analyses, forged approval signatures, and buried warning signs that should have killed the deal. Why? Because Lavania had a personal stake in one of Harrington's competitors. If Hartwell acquired Harrington, merged it with our existing holdings, and then discovered it was essentially worthless, Hartwell would be financially devastated. Our stock would tank. And Lavinia's competitor would swoop in to acquire the remaining assets at a fraction of their actual value. It was brilliant, it was sociopathic, and it was about to become public knowledge. I spent nights lying awake, planning my next move. I couldn't just go to Bennett. He would warn Lavinia, and they would find a way to bury the evidence and destroy me. I couldn't go to HR for obvious reasons. I needed someone with real power, someone who had as much to lose as I did if this fraud continued. That's when I thought of Penelope Zhang. Penelope Zhang was a venture capitalist and one of Hartwell's largest individual investors. She had built her fortune by being ruthless, thorough, and absolutely intolerant of corruption. I had met her once at a company event years ago. She probably didn't remember me, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she had $50 million invested in Hartwell, and she would lose most of it if the Harrington acquisition went through as planned. Getting in touch with her proved to be difficult. Her assistant screened calls aggressively, and my emails went unanswered. Finally, I did something desperate. I showed up at her office building and waited in the lobby for 6 hours until she came down to leave for the day. Miss Zhang, I said, stepping forward as she headed toward the exit. My name is Evelyn Reed. I work at Hartwell Financial, and I have information about the Harrington acquisition that I think you need to see. Her security detail moved to intercept me, but Penelope held up a hand. She studied me with sharp, calculating eyes. I have 5 minutes, she said. Make it count. I made it count. In the elevator ride up to her office, I gave her the shortest, most devastating summary I could manage. Falsified reports, financial fraud. A vice president who was actively working to destroy the company for personal profit. When the elevator doors opened, she turned to her assistant. Cancel my dinner reservation, and get Thomas Wu on the phone. Thomas Wu was one of the most aggressive corporate attorneys in the city. For the next 3 hours, I sat in Penelope's conference room and laid out everything. Every piece of evidence, every recorded conversation, every document that Alex had recovered. Penelope listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, her expression growing darker with each revelation. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Why didn't you go to the board directly? Because Bennett is complicit, I said. Maybe not actively, but he's allowed this to happen. He's ignored every warning sign because Lavania makes him look good. The board won't act unless they're forced to. And you think I can force them? I think you're the only one who can. Penelope smiled thinly. I like you, Evelyn Reed. You've got more spine than most of the men I deal with. She turned to her attorney. Thomas, I want a full forensic audit initiated immediately, and I want the Regulatory Commission contacted. If this evidence is as damning as it appears, Lavania Cross is going to prison. What about me? I asked. If Lavania finds out I'm behind this, she'll destroy what's left of my career. She can't destroy what no longer exists, Penelope said. After tonight, your old career is over. But if you're willing to see this through, I can promise you something much better. The Harrington Acquisition Board meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. It was supposed to be a formality, a rubber stamp approval before the deal closed. Lavania had been preparing for weeks, and I knew she planned to use the meeting to humiliate me one final time. She had arranged for me to present a minor portion of the analysis, just enough rope to hang myself when Creasa's sabotage became apparent. I let her think her plan was working. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early. The boardroom was on the top floor, all glass walls and panoramic city views. The table could seat 20 people comfortably, and every seat would be filled. Board members, senior executives, department heads, and of course, Lavania and Creasa, sitting near the head of the table like royalty. I set up my laptop and projector, my hands steady despite my racing heart. I had practiced this moment 100 times in my head. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Bennett opened the meeting at 2 p.m. sharp. Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to finalize the Harrington Industries acquisition. This represents a significant strategic opportunity for Hartwell, and I'm pleased to report that all the due diligence has been completed successfully. Lavania, would you like to present the summary? Lavania stood, elegant in a cream-colored suit, her smile confident. Of course. As you'll see from these projections, Harrington represents an excellent addition to our portfolio. The synergies are clear, the financials are strong, and we anticipate significant returns within the first fiscal year. She clicked through her presentation, pointing out carefully curated data points that painted a rosy picture of Harrington's future. Creasa sat beside her, nodding along, occasionally interjecting with rehearsed comments that made her sound knowledgeable. And now, Lavania said, her eyes finding me across the room, I'd like to invite Evelyn Reed to present her analysis of Harrington's data infrastructure. Evelyn has been working on this component for several weeks. This was my cue to either succeed or fail spectacularly. Lavania expected failure. She had made sure Creasa had corrupted my files again last night. She expected me to stumble, to fumble, to provide her with the justification she needed to fire me in front of the entire board. Instead, I stood up and smiled. Thank you, Lavania, but I think we need to discuss something more important than data infrastructure. The room went silent. Bennett frowned. Evelyn, we have an agenda. I understand that, Mr. Bennett, but I have information that the board needs to hear before any vote is taken on the Harrington acquisition. Lavinia's face flushed. This is highly inappropriate. Evelyn, sit down. No, I said calmly. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector, overriding Lavinia's presentation. I think everyone here deserves to know the truth about what they're about to approve. Bennett stood up. Evelyn, I'm warning you. Then warn me after you've seen this. I pressed play on the first video. It was a recording from 3 weeks ago, Creasa and Lavania in Lavania's office, clearly visible and audible thanks to the camera I had hidden in a decorative plant. Mom, the Harrington numbers still don't add up, Creasa's voice filled the boardroom. If anyone actually looks at the underlying data, they'll see that their assets are overvalued by at least 40%. Then make sure no one looks at the underlying data, Lavania replied. Bury the real numbers in appendices, use technical language. Make it boring. These board members won't read past the executive summary. What if someone does? What if that nosy bitch Evelyn finds something? Lavania laughed. Evelyn doesn't have access to the real files, and even if she did, who would believe her? Her reputation is destroyed. I've made sure of that. I paused the video. The boardroom was completely silent. Every face was pale. Lavania had half risen from her chair, her mouth open, her eyes wild. That's fabricated, she said. That's a deepfake. You can't possibly think that's real. I have timestamps, I have the original files, and I have a lot more where that came from, I said. But let's keep going, shall we? The next recording was audio only, Lavania instructing Creasa on how to forge document approval signatures. Then another video of Creasa deliberately altering financial projections in the Harrington files. Then the emails Alex had recovered showing Lavania's stake in Harrington's competitor. Then testimony from Marcus Thompson, Sarah Chen, and David Okonkwo, each describing how they had been destroyed by the same tactics that had been used against me. With each piece of evidence, Lavania's facade crumbled. She tried to interrupt, to shout me down, but Bennett ordered her to be quiet. The board members were leaning forward now, their expressions ranging from shock to fury. One of them, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Wolfe, was taking notes with shaking hands. This is criminal, she said quietly. This isn't just internal misconduct, this is securities fraud. It is, came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Penelope Zhang stood there, flanked by her attorney and 3 people in dark suits with badges visible on their belts. My name is Penelope Zhang, and I'm one of Hartwell's largest shareholders, she said, walking into the room like she owned it. These gentlemen and lady are from the Securities and Exchange Commission. They've been briefed on the situation, and they have warrants to seize all documents related to the Harrington acquisition and to interview everyone involved. Lavinia stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. "You can't do this. You have no authority." "Actually," one of the SEC agents said, stepping forward, "we can and we are. Miss Cross, Miss Cressa Cross, you're both being detained for questioning regarding potential securities fraud, market manipulation, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." The chaos that followed was almost beautiful. Lavinia screaming about her attorneys, Cressa crying, makeup running down her face, clinging to her mother, board members shouting questions, Bennett trying desperately to regain control of the situation, and me, standing at the front of the room, finally breathing freely for the first time in 18 months. As the SEC agents led Lavinia and Cressa out of the boardroom, Lavinia turned to look at me one last time. The hatred in her eyes was pure, undiluted. "You've destroyed yourself," she hissed. "You'll never work in this industry again." I smiled. "That's fine. I'd rather be unemployed than work for monsters." After that, everything happened fast. The SEC investigation moved with surprising speed, probably because the evidence was so overwhelming. Within a week, criminal charges were filed. Lavinia and Cressa were both indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The Harrington acquisition was immediately canceled, saving Hartwell from financial ruin and actually causing our stock price to rise when investors realized how close we had come to disaster. Bennett was forced to resign. The board determined that while he hadn't actively participated in the fraud, his willful blindness and failure to investigate complaints constituted gross negligence. Several other executives who had been part of Lavinia's inner circle were also pushed out, and then something unexpected happened. Patricia Wolfe, the board member who had taken such careful notes during my presentation, called me into a meeting. She had been appointed interim CEO while the board searched for permanent leadership. "Miss Reed," she said, gesturing for me to sit, "I want to apologize. On behalf of this company, I want to apologize for what was done to you. You were failed by every system that should have protected you." "Thank you," I said, not quite sure where this was going. "I've reviewed your employment record. Before Lavinia arrived, you were one of our top performers. 3 consecutive years of outstanding reviews, 2 industry innovation awards. You developed the predictive modeling system we still use in half our departments." That was a long time ago. It was 2 years ago, and the only reason it feels like ancient history is because Lavinia spent 18 months systematically destroying your reputation. She leaned forward. "We're rebuilding this company, Evelyn. We're cleaning house and starting over with people who have integrity. I'd like you to be part of that." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm offering you Lavinia's position, Vice President of Strategic Operations. Full authority to restructure the department, hire your own team, and implement the controls that should have been in place all along." I stared at her. "You're offering me her job." "I'm offering you a job. The fact that it was previously held by someone who tried to destroy you is just poetic justice." Patricia smiled. "What do you say?" What did I say? I said yes. Obviously, I said yes. My first day as vice president was surreal. I walked into Lavinia's old office, which was now my office, and stood by the window looking out at the city. This was the view she had enjoyed while plotting to destroy people's careers. The same desk where she had schemed with her daughter. The same walls that had witnessed so much cruelty. I was going to fill this space with something different. The first thing I did was reach out to Marcus Thompson, Sarah Chen, and David Okonkwo. I offered them all positions in my new department. Marcus was hesitant at first, still wounded by what had happened to him, but eventually agreed to come back as a senior analyst. Sarah decided to stay in Taiwan, but we worked out a remote consulting arrangement that gave her meaningful work and restored her reputation. David accepted a position as a team lead, and I watched him walk into the office on his first day with tears in his eyes. "I thought my career was over," he told me. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." "You don't need to thank me," I said. "You never should have been forced out in the first place." Ella Martinez, the junior analyst who had been brave enough to tell me about Cressa's boasting, was promoted to senior analyst. Alex Kim, the IT administrator who had kept all those crucial records, was offered his old position back with a significant raise and a formal apology from the company. He accepted, but only after making me promise that things really were going to be different this time. "I promise," I told him. "And if I ever break that promise, you have my permission to expose me just like we exposed Lavinia." The trial was a media sensation. Financial fraud involving prominent corporate executives always draws attention, but this case had the added drama of a mother-daughter criminal duo and their victims fighting back. I had to testify, which was terrifying, but Penelope's attorney prepared me well. Lavinia's defense tried to paint me as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind, someone who had fabricated evidence to get revenge for legitimate performance issues. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The videos were authenticated by digital forensics experts. The financial documents spoke for themselves. And when Marcus, Sarah, and David all testified about their experiences, the pattern of behavior became undeniable. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had built her career prosecuting white-collar crime, showed no mercy during sentencing. Miss Crasa Cross, you used positions of power to systematically destroy the careers and livelihoods of good people. You committed fraud that could have bankrupted your company and harmed countless innocent investors. You showed no remorse, no respect for the law, and no concern for anyone but yourselves. Lavinia received 12 years in federal prison. Crasa received 8 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution in the millions of dollars and were permanently barred from working in the financial services industry. As they were led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, not joy, just a quiet sense of completion. Justice wasn't about making them suffer. It was about making sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. 6 months after the trial, I was sitting in my office, reviewing quarterly projections with my team, when my assistant buzzed me. "Miss Reed, you have a visitor." She says it's personal. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I told her to send them in. The woman who walked through my door was in her early 30s, professionally dressed, with nervous energy practically radiating off her. "Miss Reed? My name is Jennifer Lawson. I work at Meridian Capital, and I have a problem that I think you might understand." I gestured for her to sit. "Tell me about it." For the next hour, Jennifer told me a story that was painfully familiar. A corrupt executive, a protected favorite who couldn't be touched, a system designed to silence victims rather than help them. She had documentation, but she didn't know what to do with it. She was scared of losing her job, scared of retaliation, scared of being destroyed the way she had seen others destroyed. When she finished, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "This is Penelope Zhang's attorney. Tell him I sent you. He specializes in cases like yours." "Thank you," she said, taking the card with trembling hands. "But what if it doesn't work? What if they're too powerful?" I thought about the night I threw wine in Lavinia's face, about the months of gathering evidence, about standing in that boardroom and choosing to fight back even though I could have lost everything. "No one is too powerful," I said. "Not if you're willing to fight. And you're not alone. None of us are alone." Jennifer left with hope in her eyes, and I returned to my work. But her visit reminded me that the fight wasn't really over. There were other Lavinias out there, other Crasas, other companies where corruption thrived because good people were too scared to speak up. That's when I started the program. I called it the Reed Initiative, and it was designed to protect whistleblowers within Hartwell Financial and eventually beyond. We created secure reporting channels. We partnered with law firms that specialized in employment law. We established a fund to provide financial support for employees who faced retaliation for reporting misconduct. Patricia Wolf loved the idea and made it a cornerstone of the company's new culture. "This is what accountability looks like," she said at the press conference announcing the program. "We're not just saying we value integrity. We're putting systems in place to protect the people who demonstrate it." The program expanded beyond what I had imagined. Other companies reached out, wanting to implement similar initiatives. I started speaking at conferences, sharing my story, encouraging others to stand up against workplace abuse and corruption. I became, somewhat reluctantly, a voice for people who had been silenced. Now, a year after everything fell apart and came back together, I sometimes stand at my office window and think about how much has changed. The woman who used to stand here, desperately trying to survive each day, feels like a stranger. That woman was afraid. She was broken. She had forgotten her own worth. I'm not that woman anymore. Last week, I received a letter. It was postmarked from the federal correctional facility where Lavinia is serving her sentence. For a moment, I considered throwing it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was short, written in Lavinia's precise handwriting. "You think you won," it said. "You think you're a hero. But you're just a bitter woman who couldn't handle being shown her place. I'll be out in 8 years with good behavior, and when I am, I'll make sure you remember what it means to cross me." I read it twice, then dropped it in my shredder. Some people never learn. Some people never change. And that's fine, because I'm not responsible for fixing them. I'm only responsible for making sure they can't hurt others. I have a meeting in 20 minutes with a new hire who reminds me a little of myself at that age, eager and nervous and full of potential. I'm going to mentor her properly. I'm going to give her the support and respect that every employee deserves. I'm going to make sure she knows that her voice matters, and that speaking up is not just allowed, but encouraged. Because that's what this was all about. Not revenge. Not even justice, really. It was about reclaiming my voice, reclaiming my worth, and helping others do the same. My phone buzzes with a text from Alex. "Dinner tonight? Team wants to celebrate the new client acquisition. You're buying, boss." I smile and type back, "Deal, but only because you finally fixed that server issue that's been driving me crazy. Hey, I'm it. I fix everything eventually." As I gather my files for the meeting, I catch my reflection in the window. I look different now, stronger, more certain. The woman looking back at me isn't someone who can be pushed around or silenced. She's someone who pushed back and won, and if I can do it, anyone can. The road from victim to victor isn't easy. It requires courage I didn't know I had. It requires sacrifice, strategy, and the willingness to risk everything for what's right. But it's worth it. God, it's worth it. Because now when I walk through the halls of Hartwell Financial, people don't avoid me. They smile. They ask for my advice. They treat me with the respect I always deserved but had to fight to reclaim. And when I see young employees struggling, when I notice the warning signs of workplace abuse, I don't look away. I act. Because I remember what it feels like to be drowning while everyone around you pretends everything is fine. That ends with me. That ends with us. That ends with everyone who refuses to accept that abuse and corruption are just the way things are. The meeting goes well. The new hire, whose name is Melissa, asks smart questions and takes detailed notes. She reminds me of myself before Lavenia, before everything went wrong. She still believes that hard work and talent are enough. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure her belief is justified. After work, I meet the team at a restaurant downtown. 20 people crowded around a long table, laughing, celebrating, planning future projects. These are good people, honest people. People who deserve to work in an environment where they're valued rather than exploited. Alex raises his glass. To Evelyn, who taught us all that sometimes the right thing to do is also the most badass thing to do. Everyone laughs and raises their glasses. I feel warmth spreading through my chest, and I realize this is what happiness feels like. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of people who matter and work that means something. To all of us, I say, for having the courage to rebuild something better. We drink to that. Later, as I'm driving home through the city streets, I think about Jennifer Lawson, the woman who came to my office seeking help. I wonder if she's made contact with the attorney yet. I wonder if she'll find the courage to fight back against whatever injustice she's facing. I hope she does. I hope she knows she's not alone. My phone rings. It's Penelope Jang. We've become friends over the past year, bonding over our shared contempt for corruption and our mutual appreciation for good wine. Evelyn. I hope you're sitting down, she says when I answer. I'm driving, actually. Pull over then. I have news. I find a parking spot and put the car in park. Okay, what's up? The SEC just finished investigating another company that Lavenia had ties to before Hartwell. Turns out she was running similar schemes there. They're looking at extending her sentence. How much longer? Could be another 10 years. They found evidence of insider trading, market manipulation, the works. She wasn't just corrupt at Hartwell. She's been doing this for decades. I lean back in my seat, processing this information. All those people she hurt over the years. All those careers she destroyed. And now, finally, she's being held accountable for all of it. Good, I say. That's good. There's more. They want you to testify again. About the pattern of behavior, the systematic nature of her crimes. Are you up for it? Am I up for it? 6 months ago, I would have hesitated. I would have worried about the time commitment, the emotional toll, the risk of opening old wounds. But now I don't hesitate at all. Absolutely, I say. When do they need me? After hanging up with Penelope, I sit in my car for a while, watching people walk past on the sidewalk. Regular people, going about their lives, most of them probably working jobs they tolerate rather than love, dealing with their own struggles and triumphs. I wonder how many of them are facing situations like I faced. How many are being bullied by bosses, exploited by colleagues, trapped in toxic environments that make them question their own worth? How many are waiting for that moment of courage that will change everything? I hope they find it. I hope they fight back, and I hope they win, because that's the thing about justice. It's not something that just happens. It's something you have to fight for, tooth and nail, against every obstacle and every voice telling you to just accept how things are. I start the car and head home. Tomorrow, I have a full day of meetings, project reviews, and strategic planning sessions. I have a company to help run, a team to mentor, and a mission to continue building a workplace where integrity matters more than politics. It's a lot of work. It's exhausting sometimes. But it's mine. I earned it. I fought for it. And I'm going to protect it. As I pull into my driveway, I see a package waiting on my doorstep. When I open it, I find a bottle of expensive champagne with a note from Patricia Wolf, for the woman who saved our company, with gratitude and respect. I bring the bottle inside and set it on my kitchen counter. I'll open it this weekend, maybe invite Alex and Ella over, have a quiet celebration with the people who stood by me when it mattered most. But for now, I pour myself a glass of regular wine, the same Cabernet Sauvignon I threw at Lavenia all those months ago. I take it out to my balcony and look at the city lights spread out below me. A year ago, I was drowning. I was broken. I had lost everything that mattered except my sense of right and wrong, and somehow, impossibly, that was enough. That tiny kernel of integrity was enough to rebuild from. I raise my glass to the night sky, to every person who has ever been pushed down and told they don't matter, to everyone who has ever wanted to give up but didn't, to all of us who fight back, Not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Here's to the truth, I say quietly. May it always find a way to surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. The wine tastes like victory, like justice, like freedom, and like the promise of a future that I'm finally free to build on my own terms.